The following episode is part of a series produced in conjunction with the 14th Shanghai Biennale titled Cosmos Cinema.
Hi, my name is Hallie Ayres. I was on the curatorial team for the 14th Shanghai Biennale called Cosmos Cinema. Today I am joined by Heidi Lau, who's an artist who has some very beautiful ceramic sculptures in the show. She's an artist whose luminous ceramics evoke architectural ruins, funerary vessels, and mythological creatures. She molds clay by hand before adding layers of iridescent glaze in a labor-intensive creative practice that at once embodies a means of processing loss and a mode of world building. Channeling her personal history, the syncretic cultures of her native Macau, and the diasporic experience, Heidi transforms Taoist ritual tokens of mourning and remembrance into ceramic objects that might be understood not only as bridges to another realm, but also as expressions that are at once nostalgic, resentful, and tentatively hopeful of how it might be possible to live amidst the ruins of the present. So in the Shanghai Biennale, Heidi's work appears in a cluster of the show we called 10,000 Things. This is kind of where the horizon of the show explodes. In a sense, it's a section that functions like a telescope or an observatory through which to view the rest of the exhibition. And the works in this section present myriad perspectives that attempt to produce a kind of multifaceted whole in a methodology that reflects what philosopher Hugh Kui's definition of cosmotechnics says, which is the, quote, the unification of the cosmos and the moral through technical activities, whether craft making or art making, end quote. So he writes that, quote, what kind of morality, which and whose cosmos, and how to unite them vary from one culture to another according to different dynamics, end quote. So in this section as a whole, 10,000 Things, it poses the question of how we might live with the 10,000 things of which our intersecting realities are constituted. So within the context of this section and within the context of Cosmos Cinema as a whole, Heidi is showing 4 recent works. Their titles are Rings of Saturn, Bone Lantern, Untitled, and Blank Has Questions for Moon's Reflection. So first of all, thank you very much for being here today. I wanted to first ask if you might speak a bit about how you started working within this realm of forms that evoke spirit vessels and burial objects, funerary garments, etc. And then particularly in clay, can you talk a bit about the materiality of ceramics that allows for a sort of molding on a connection between past and present, the spiritual realm and the physical realm, the kind of otherworldly and the organic?
Hi, it's nice to be here. I think maybe I'll just start with kind of like a personal or even familial reason of why I'm drawn to, things from other realms. So both my grandparents were very devout Taoists. And one of the earliest memory of going to a temple with my grandma was her telling me to say hi to the god of the gatekeeper of hell, because he's my great grandfather. So it turns out when my grandma was a really young girl, I think there was a pandemic going on, and she almost didn't survive. So in order to keep her on this realm, her parents hired a Taoist priest to do this ritual on her to make her the goddaughter of the gatekeeper of hell, so that he will keep her out. So I think even as a really young child, I feel this almost like familial connection to the other realm, and also like this kind of thought that, oh, like death itself has this almost expansive dimension where it is not that you can always come back, but it's not like as we say, like a life and death. It's not like a definitive boundaries. But I started making kind of this like funeral objects because of my mom had kind of I could say like a traumatic death from leukemia, and at the time I was really looking to grieve for her. I guess, and the only way that I feel, I guess, justify that heaviness is to grieve with my hands. Through like laboring through this, I guess, emotion that is, that I don't know how to process, and in thinking about like her body slowly losing its, I guess, humanness. This is kind of like I don't know, almost like a romantic way, to like hand sculpt something that maybe like gain through my hands, like gain some of like her memories, like her energy, so it's kind of like almost like maybe trying to have, retain some of her humanness in this object. And with clay, yeah, I think sometimes I see myself almost as like a invisible agent where like while working with this medium, I think sometimes there is this almost like a cultural image of like a craftsman making objects out of, quote, like formless clay, or like making things out of nothing. And I think I've always felt like that narrative almost seems slightly like egocentric and like colonial, because it's like I'm also nothing. Like it's, yeah, I feel like I'm, when using this like material, I'm like trying to channel a lot of things that I have learned, like, or felt like passively, kind of using my hands for this as a medium to like pass through and like to mold this clay. So it's, and then and at the same time, I felt like the clay kind of changed me also. So it's this kind of like two-sided relationship that I personally don't have any. I've never worked anything out that make me, that have this kind of direction, this kind of relationship.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, it's a very long-winded answer.
No, not at all. No, it was perfect. Yeah, could you describe a bit about how you see your work positioned as a means of scrambling conventional conceptions of time and space? And by that, I mean kind of like how your work takes the form of funerary objects, how this might allow for rethinking or re-understanding relationships with memory, ritual, and ancestors.
I think I start making these pieces that I call spirit vessels, and it's like a term that based on Han Dynasty funeral objects. It's usually vessels that are decorated with, it's like semi realistic depiction of Chinese society like at the time, and they are meant to be buried and as blueprint for afterlife or the other realms, whatever you call it. And yeah, I think sometimes I see my work in similar ways where something is like channeled through another time, and I kind of intercepted it, the information, pull it into clay, and now there's some kind of disruption into like, oh, what we think of something is, quote, like contemporary. Like I see it as kind of like a small disruption.
Yeah, I also see what you were talking about earlier with the connection of how you're kind of a vessel almost of producing the work in the incorporation of hands, a lot of hands in the sculptures. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk also about the architectural aspects of your sculptures and how you envision your work kind of capturing this materiality that we've talked about, but also the materiality of the past, especially in respect to the palimpsest of histories and architectural histories that are embedded in Macau, which is where you grew up. I know you've spoken a bit about the kind of ruptures between a sense of home and the diaspora in previous conversations. And I'm wondering how your works function as a means of working through this, or even sort of assuaging sense of displacement and things like that.
Yeah, sometimes I think about that term, diasporic intimacy, which is, I think, written by Svetlana Bohm, this writer. If I'm correct, I think she was mostly referring to objects that immigrants used to furnish their home. And it's actually, it's kind of is used to remind one of their home, but also has this transient quality of almost like a suspicion of a fixed origin. And I think for me, when I sculpt or, use this very particular palette that I remember from growing up in Macau, I think I have that same feeling where I'm almost sculpting in like riddles, or as in like things are like in fogs. It's not like a direct representation of it's more like the feeling of like crumbling materiality, which is what I experienced growing up. I kind of when Macau was kind of transitioning, being back to being part of China, and then all of this like feeling of like a big changes about to come that is really felt through the urban landscape, and that kind of like energy. I don't know. I find it really appropriate to capture with clay. But yeah, I think it's almost like this, like as you said, like kind of like how to like live with monuments that not just kind of maybe like point towards some kind of origin, but maybe even like it's like both like suspicious and long for it in some ways.
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you arrived at the kind of chain link that you use to hang sculptures from the ceiling, and this use of chains that recurs on the floor as well, chain links made out of clay, but then also kind of hardware style chain links that hang the sculptures from the ceiling. How did you arrive at that apparatus?
Yeah, so the chain link, so that's actually a piece, it started because I was trying to weave with clay to make this like burial garment for my mom after she passed. And at the time, I mean, to me, it's like literally the most impractical and labor intensive way to I don't know, to like make work out of clay. But it also makes so much sense because then her, in my head, then her body would literally, it's porous enough that her body would like go back to ground. So like so it was a very specific reason in the beginning. But as I kept using that technique or motif, it has shifted to more like when I want to depict, let's say, like water or like skin or like a slippage, something that has movement, so that the chain link can be like manipulated or extended. It's also like, I don't know, almost like a disruptive way to like, I don't know, think about clay as it being like extremely precious. I mean, it is fragile, but it's just a different kind of like mindfulness, to handle. But yeah, so for me, that's kind of like how I started using the chain link.
Cool. So I have one more question, and this is one that I'm kind of obliged to ask, given that the biennial's title is Cosmos Cinema. So I know in the past you've referenced Hong Kong zombie movies from the 80s and 90s as a source of inspiration for your work, and in particular for burial garments rendered in clay. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that reference for you.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, growing up in Macau, we don't have our own cultural output as much. So like, I definitely, like I can't talk about Hong Kong cinema as if, the right subject. But I think even as a kid, like I was like really drawn to how this like anger and resentment, even like from like beyond death, it's able to be portrayed in such like humor. Like most of this, at the time at least, a lot of it they're like quite campy, and a lot of times has like very political undertone. Like sometimes it would take place in a police office. Sometimes it was like a old burial ground for World War II soldiers. You know, so it was this almost like this kind of like unspeakable side of like trauma that these things happened, and then an intern cop would like, I don't know, like accidentally step into, you know, and that bring the whole thing into a chaos. I don't know. I feel like, and that, yeah, I feel like it's the time when I think I do channel a resentment in my work, but maybe not in a humorous way. And that's something I like aspire to sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think that working with sometimes things that I feel like heavy, it's like nice to see. And it's also like, I don't know. For me, there's nothing comparable to like Cantonese humor. Yeah, it just like makes me feel a bit more grounded when I work.
Well, thank you so much. This has been lovely, and thanks for coming in and chatting about your work and for presenting it in the biennial as well.
Thank you.